Good evening. Thank you. Good evening, Bill. Thanks for coming to tonight's program. My name is Jacob Barco, and I'm the Vice President of Operations here at the Jefferson. It is my pleasure to kick off tonight's event, and I'm here to do three things. Go over some housekeeping notes, tell you about upcoming JES programs, and introduce tonight's speaker. First, some housekeeping. If you need assistance during the event, please find one of our volunteers in the back who will be happy to help you. If you're not yet a JES member and you would like to join, please stop into our front office after the program. Reminders for the Q&A portion. After the presentation, please raise your hand to be called on and speak directly into the microphone so that our presenter can hear you loud and clear. Please keep your questions brief and concise and refrain from offering lengthy statements. Now on to upcoming events. Tomorrow, right back here in the Jefferson at noon, we have Lieutenant Jamie Russo, who is going to present on responding and helping the Erie Police Department's Crisis Intervention Unit, exploring what that is and why it matters to our community. And then back here again and then back in Fairview on Monday, March 24th, we have Dr. Ghosheh presenting a lecture at the Lincoln Community Center Library, and that is on Gaza, devastation, despair, and destruction. And then lastly, Tuesday, March 25th at 6 p.m., we have Charles Gray and Matthew Platts. They're going to be presenting a lecture out at the Corey Higher Education Council, and that lecture is titled Fiber Optic Broadband, How This Infrastructure Shapes the Future of Rural Spaces. And lastly, but most importantly, I would like to introduce you to our presenter this evening, Dr. Ghosheh. Dr. Ghosheh is a scholar in residence and chairman of the Board of Trustees here at the JES. He earned his PhD in economic development from SUNY Buffalo and taught at Edinburgh University until his retirement in 2022. A native of Jerusalem, he has lived in 8 countries, traveled to 61, and taught in multiple nations, including Japan, China, and Italy. A Fulbright scholar, he has received numerous accolades, including Pennsylvania Geographer of the Year and Edinburgh University's Educator of the Year. So ladies and gentlemen, let's give a warm JES welcome to Dr. Ghosheh.
Thank you, Jake, for this kind introduction. It's nice to see everybody here. I know it's been a while since I got here. I just got back from Hawaii. I feel bad for those of you who spent winter here. I kept track of the snow, how much snow I missed. So I'm glad I missed most of it. Not all of it, but a lot of it. So it's nice to be back here. Today our topic is Syria. What's going on, where we're going. So as I like to usually do, I'm going to go for about 45 minutes or so. And I will leave us some time for question and discussion. So if you have some questions, please hold on until we get to that. Syria, like much of the rest of the region in the Middle East, was never really a nation state as we now define nation states. It was part of a much larger empire. So going back to the Sumerian, Akkadian, Babylonian empires, Syria was not a country. It's been part of much bigger empires, including the Greek, the Roman, the Arab Islamic, and finally the Ottoman Turkish Ottoman Empire. So this is something I guess I'd like to emphasize. The fragmentation of the region is a recent phenomenon, only about a century old. This is one part of the world that has been inhabited for thousands of years. This is part of the cradle of civilization, where people have lived there longer than anywhere else in the world, but they have not lived as they do today, divided. So when we look at maps of the region, we can see that there is no Syria. There is no Syria. You will see some of the cities, Damascus, Aleppo, but you will not see Syria. I'm sure we can make this presentation available if anybody's interested. I can have a PDF copy sent to any of you that would be interested in it. So the last great empire to control most of the region was the Turkish Ottoman Empire that controlled the region for 400 years. until World War I. So the problems in the region were magnified just about a century ago. That's when we had the fragmentation. So as the Ottoman Empire was collapsing, that's when we had the fragmentation of the region. Other powers started to take over some of the Ottoman possessions. So Russia, Great Britain, France took over some of these territories. The biggest event, of course, happened right after the end of World War II. The Ottoman Empire collapsed. The British, the French, and the Russians signed a secret agreement. And you say, but wait a second, how come we know about this secret agreement? Because the Russians withdrew from it due to the Bolshevik Revolution, and they decided we're no longer an imperial power. Nobody believes that, but they did not participate in this division of the region. So some of you were talking about, was Syria part of the British or the French possessions? Syria was given to the French. I guess next week when we talk about Gaza, I guess, including Palestine, was supposed to be part of the French division of the region, but the British convinced them to let them have it. And that changed everything. So they created a British-controlled area or influenced area and a French-controlled area. Syria was subject to French rule for about maybe 29, 30 years. So not a long period, but that changed the geography and history of the region, and certainly of Syria. You probably, some of you have watched Lawrence of Arabia. Yes? Yeah. The Arabs made a deal that they will fight their Turkish Muslim brothers and side with the Europeans, the British and the French, to defeat the Turks because they wanted independence. And Lawrence was engineering this alliance. So the Arabs were attacking from inside, the fifth column, while the British and the French were attacking from the outside. Now, they were promised you will have independence and you will have the restoration of this Arab empire. What happened? We have the restoration of British and French rule instead. So, as a consolation prize for the sheriff of Mecca, who was collaborating with the British and the French, they decided, we will give you 3 kingdoms. Each will be headed by one of your sons. So we'll have a Hashemite kingdom in Iraq, Hashemite kingdom in Syria, and a Hashemite kingdom in Jordan. Now, the British and the French thought, we install you as a king, but don't think that you're a king. We'll tell you what to do. And what happens if you don't get the message? We'll deal with you. So this is how the region was fragmented. This is the first time we have the creation of these mini states as independent countries. During and after this European colonial period. What they wanted to do is create puppet regimes that were dependent on them and will serve their interest. So when people talked about Syria before, they were talking about Greater Syria. Greater Syria is the Levant, which included what's now Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, and Israel and Palestine. One of the problems that resulted from these creation of new states as they are today is these countries do not reflect the ethnic, the sectarian, the linguistic, or tribal divisions in the region. So you look at Iraq, we have the Kurds, we have the Sunnis, we have the Shia, we have the Christians. You can look at Iran, and we have, again, Turks and Persians and all kinds of different groups, and Baluchis. And so all of these countries have a diverse population, and some would say that by design, so that they will be dependent on outside powers for maintaining control of the government. So oftentimes what we had is a minority government supported by the colonial power. So they will be dependent on that colonial power to stay in power. So this is the difference between Syria, as people in the region knew it. Syria as a region included Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, Israel, and Palestine. And the new Syria, and you look at the new Syria, you will notice it's missing few parts. This province that the Syrians call Iskenderun, that the Turks call Hatay, was given to the Turks in 1939 because the Turks did such a good job shedding their Islamic heritage and becoming secular European. So this is an Arabic-speaking province in Turkey. Lebanon was established by the French as a Christian country. So even though Lebanon has about 70% Muslim population, the president of Lebanon must be a Maronite Christian. That's the constitution. The defense minister of Lebanon must be a Maronite Christian. The prime minister must be a Sunni Muslim. Where does that leave the Shia, who constitute about 50% of the population? Oh, they did not account for them.
Yeah.
Are the Shia happy with this? So the Constitution basically gave power to the Maronites and the Sunni Muslims and did not account for the Shia, who are almost a majority now. So going back to Syria, the area that we know now as Syria was the heartland of the Arab Empire in the early days. After Islam swept across the region from Mecca into what's now Iraq and Syria and eventually Egypt all the way to Morocco, Damascus was the headquarters of that Muslim empire for about a century. So it was the heartland. So this is the golden era, where Damascus was the capital of this vast Muslim empire that stretches across West Asia and North Africa. Obviously, power switched to Baghdad, and Baghdad became the golden city for 400 or 500 years, until that also collapsed with the Mongol invasion. So Syria, in the again 1517 until 1917, was a province in this vast Turkish Ottoman Empire. In Turkish, they call it wilayat, basically a state or a province. Following the end of World War I and the Sykes-Picot Agreement, the British and the French dividing the spoils of war, the French installed one of the sheriffs of Mecca's son as the king of Syria. And he was foolish enough to believe he was really a king. He wanted to assert independence, and of course the French shot him dead. That was the end of the monarchy in Syria. It didn't last very long. The monarchy in Iraq did not last much longer either, because the Iraqis blew up the royal palace with everybody in it to make sure there's no Hashemite left to claim the throne. The only surviving Hashemite kingdom is Jordan. We still have the Hashemite kingdom of Jordan. So the French mandate and the mandate system as an important concept. The League of Nations came up with the mandate system. Palestine was a mandate. Syria was a mandate. The mandate is temporary supervision by one of those great powers until the locals can get their act together and have self-governance. So just a few years until the natives can get their act together and establish their own government. So Syria officially gained independence in 1946 and was highly unstable. They had many coups, just like Iraq did. They tried. Syria was a leader in what they call pan-Arab unity. They wanted to unite all the Arabs. Who are the Arabs? People who speak Arabic. It doesn't say anything about religion. One of the leaders of this pan-Arab movement is a Christian Syrian who established the Ba'ath Party. We've heard of the Ba'ath Party, yes? Was exported from Syria to Iraq and to other countries in the region. The Ba'ath Party's three goals is liberty, unity of all Arabs, and freedom. So that's what they wanted. They exported that to Iraq, so we had the Ba'ath Party in Syria, and we had the Ba'ath Party in Iraq. So Syria they attempted a union with Egypt. President Nasser of Egypt was the hero of the Arab world and one of the main drivers behind reuniting the Arabs who were divided by the colonial powers. So if we can reunite, we can become a great nation, a country that controls half of the world's oil, a country that has as many people as the United States, a country that has twice as many territories as the United States. So, what attempted unity lasted about 3 years, ended by a military coup. Soon after that military coup, the Ba'ath Party took control, and one of the leaders of the Ba'ath Party was a name called Assad. This is the father. So the father took control of the government and did not relinquish it until he died. When he passed away in 2000, his son, an optometrist, who was not supposed to be president, his brother was being groomed to be president. His brother died in a car accident. So this became the accidental president. Now, the Syrian constitution said you must be 40 years old to be president. Bashar al-Assad was only 34. So they had to change the constitution, and now you had to be 34 to be president. So it's just a minor issue. So the Ba'ath Party under the father, Hafiz al-Assad, ruled with an iron fist. Anybody that tried to cross them would be subject to prison, capital punishment. Some of the cities, the third largest city actually revolted and was bombed, so thousands of people were killed. So in Hama, in the year 1982, when people revolted against the Assad rule, they bombed the city and killed about 30,000 people. And they cracked down on any opposition, including opposition from the Muslim Brotherhood, Islamist group that was popular in many countries in the region. So people thought it would be nice to have a new, young, well-educated man as president. He might be different from his dad. His wife was British educated, thought maybe enlightened. Maybe the son would be much different than the father. And very quickly they were disappointed. So when we look at a map of type of governments, we will notice that one of the things that stands out about the Middle East is we have autocratic regimes in many of these countries. So whether we're talking about Syria or Saudi Arabia or Oman or the UAE or Morocco or Jordan, autocratic governments. More dictatorships in the region than anywhere else. And some of them would hold elections, but you saw that Bashar al-Assad won with 97.5% of the vote. They didn't really have to hold election because they always win by 98 to 99%. There's only one candidate, one party rule. That was the rule in the Middle East. So why does Syria really matter? Why is it important? It has a geostrategic location. We can see it has a coastal area on the Mediterranean Sea. It borders on Turkey, Iraq, Lebanon, Jordan, and Israel. So an important location. And this coastal area on the Mediterranean becomes more important as we see what happens in the future. Syria became the main ally of Iran. When the rest of the world sided with Saddam Hussein in the Iran-Iraq war, Syria was the exception. Even though both were ruled by the Ba'ath Party, we have this division between the Ba'athists in Iraq and the Ba'athists in Syria. So unusual for an Arab country to side with a non-Arab country against a neighboring Arab country. And Syria became a critical link in this Shia crescent. We'll come back to this in a second. Connecting the Shia population, Shia majority Iran, with Shia majority Iraq, and Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Shia largest group in Lebanon, in southern Lebanon. And of course, it's the only remaining ally that Russia had until recently, allowing Russia to use air and naval bases along the Mediterranean Sea. Vital for Russia, the only naval bases on the Mediterranean. So this is the Shia crescent we're talking about, connecting the Shia in Iran with Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon. If we compare Syria to Pennsylvania, it's a relatively big country, about 1.5 times the size of Pennsylvania in territory, but before the war had twice the population of Syria. We don't know what the population of Syria is now. Estimate like it's been reduced by about a quarter between dead and refugees. So a large number have fled the country, about 6 million. In terms of population diversity, it's a very diverse population, like I said. Many of these countries have diverse populations, and usually they are ruled by a minority group. So in Syria, the dominant group are the Arabs. The Arabs make up about 85% of the population. And Arabs, all they do is they speak Arabic. That's how we define them. They share the language. Kurds, the Kurds speak Kurdish. It's a different language from a different family of languages. And then we have Turks, Turkmen, close to the Turkish border. Now, we have Christians, but these Christians are Arabic speakers. So they are Christian Arabs. So when it comes to religion, we have a different division. We have Sunni Arabs, about 2/3 of the population, 64%. We have Shia Arabs, the Alawites. Ali was the hero of the Shia, and that's why we had the emergence of the Shia going back, I guess, 1,500 years, when Ali and his supporters were massacred, and that gave rise to the Shia, Shia to Ali, supporters of Ali. So only 12-13% of the population. The Kurds, again, they're Muslims, they're Sunni, and then we have the Christian Arabs and the Druze. The Druze also speak Arabic, but they have a mix of religion that includes elements of Islam and elements of Judaism. So unique and different from the rest of the groups. Syria was our ally during the first Gulf War. They actually fought alongside the United States, American troops. But that did not last long. Again, people were hopeful that with Bashar al-Assad things will change. His wife was called the Rose of the Desert, British educated and raised, one of us. That's what most people thought. She was actually on the cover of Time magazine, and there was hope that Syria would be different because we have these young, educated people in charge. We could not break Syria's alliance with Iran. The Syrians stuck by Iran, and they stuck with the Russians. So much of their armaments come from Russia. They had this ironclad alliance with the two countries, Iran and Russia. So this Syrian-Iranian alliance was the big deal that we could not break. If we could break the Syrian-Iranian alliance, Syria would have been actually accepted as a normal country, would have normal relations with the United States and other Western countries. So these secular modernizing elites did not materialize. We were hoping they would be different. That did not happen. Now, because al-Assad and his Alawite minority ruled Syria, doesn't mean they ruled by themselves. They actually included other elites, including some Sunnis, including some Christians. The defense minister was Christian at one time, when he was assassinated, was replaced by a Sunni defense minister. The two vice presidents were Sunni. The chief of staff was Druze. So it's not exclusively Shia controlled, but the Shia controlled the presidency and, if you want, the instruments of government. So yes, we have 3/4 of the ministers were Sunni, but the Assad family had control of the important positions. Now, as was the case with other countries in the Middle East, the Arab Spring ushered in revolts and revolution across the region. In Syria, young people took to the streets demanding more freedom, demanding some reforms. Instead of instituting reforms, the Assad regime decided to persecute, kill, imprison those young men who were demonstrating. So that led to a 13-year war, civil war, revolution, revolt, whatever name you want to give it. So it started with the Arab Spring, and unfortunately, just like in Egypt, just like in many places in the region, the spring turned into a deep, cold winter. So what happened in Syria? We had Assad supported by his allies, the Russians, the Iranians, and the Shia in Lebanon, Hezbollah. They were fighting against the opposition. The opposition had so many different groups with so many different agendas and ideas about what Syria should look like. So many different groups supported by different countries. Some supported by Saudi Arabia, some supported by Qatar, some supported by Turkey, some supported by the United States. Now, two groups that will stand out, al-Nusra, this is the name for ISIS or Al-Qaeda in Syria. They changed their name. It's the same group, they just changed their name. So we have 100 different rebel groups, over 100 different rebel groups. They were not united. They did not coordinate very well with each other, and sometimes they fought one another. Then we have the Free Syrian Army. Some soldiers from the army left, defected, and joined the revolution. Entire brigades joined the revolution. A lot of foreign fighters came to join the fight in Syria, just like in Iraq, just like in Afghanistan. Many of these came from Chechnya, from Saudi Arabia, from Algeria. Some came from the United States. Some came from France and the UK. So many different groups. And then finally, we have the religious minorities. will focus on the Kurds because the Kurds had their own agenda. What's their agenda? Independence. Just like the Kurds in Iraq wanted independence. Just like the Kurds in Turkey wanted independence. So the Kurds, like other groups, were divided into 5 different countries. They're a minority in Turkey, a minority in Iraq, a minority in Iran, a minority in Syria, a minority in Azerbaijan. So minorities in different countries. So how did this start? It started with a small town called Dara, close to Jordan. Young people took to the streets demanding more freedom, demanding reforms. It spread to other places, to Homs, to Aleppo. And you'll notice the location of these cities. This is right on the border with Jordan. This is on the border with Lebanon. This is just 50 miles from Turkey. So they had support from outside powers. We've heard of ISIS. ISIS quickly controlled much of the desert regions of Iraq and Syria. We have the great Syrian desert with very sparse population, and it was easy for them to take control of that territory. Again, when we look at this, most of the people live along the coastal area. This is the empty area. That's why it was easy for them to take control of the Iraqi desert and the Syrian desert. So when we look at the changing maps, you could look from year to year, the map looks totally different. So many different groups controlling patches of Syrian territory. You can look at the areas controlled by ISIS, the area controlled by the Kurds, areas controlled by opposition supported by Turkey. So different maps from year to year, 2016, 2017, different maps. Different map today. This is what it looks like today. So this is government. This is the Kurds. This is Turkish-supported rebels, Israeli-occupied territory. So we have patches of Syrian territory controlled by different groups. The Syrian conflict was very bloody. Again, many of the cities were totally destroyed. One of the oldest cities in the world is Aleppo. Aleppo is the New York City of Syria. It's larger than Damascus. It was the economic hub of Syria, and it has been inhabited for over 5,000 years. So it was famous for its culture, buildings that have existed for millennia. 400,000 killed, 12% killed or injured. Millions of Syrians, if we include the displaced Syrians inside of Syria, half of all Syrians have been forced out of their homes. Some left the country, some left for other parts of Syria. So millions displaced internal refugees and many forced out of the country. The largest group went to Turkey. Turkey is home to about 3 million Syrian refugees. That's the largest group. Now, we know that we have some in Lebanon and some in Jordan, but Germany took in about 800,000 Syrian refugees. And that became a controversial issue in Germany and resulted in the government losing power. So, was that a rebellion? Was that a civil war? Was that a regional war? It's yes, yes, and yes, all of the above. So, what began as an uprising asking for freedom, for reforms, drew in regional powers, became a proxy war. So Iran and Russia and Hezbollah supported the government, the Assad regime. Other countries, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, United States, Qatar, Turkey supported different rebel groups. So we have many different groups, but again, Hezbollah became important. We'll come back to this because they were the core of the fighting force against the rebels. They were well-trained, disciplined, well-equipped, and fought for the government, even though they were Lebanese. They were Shia Lebanese. So the opposition attracted volunteers and support from many different countries, including the United States, the UK, France, and our allies in the region, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Qatar, the UAE. So we have this emergence of two camps, the Shia and the Sunni. So the Sunni monarchies united to weaken the emergence Shia alliance. So Saudi Arabia, along with the Gulf countries, Qatar, UAE, Kuwait, supported by Jordan and Morocco, two other Sunni monarchies, came to help the rebels. So many different groups. This is the big story. About 80% of them were Islamists. So remember Afghanistan. We went into Afghanistan because we did not like the socialist government. And we made a deal with the devil. Said, well, the Mujahideen were going to get rid of the government and the Russians. And we got rid of the government and the Russians. And who do we have now? Oh, the Mujahideen, who became the Taliban, who became our worst enemy. So, again, lessons to keep in mind as what's happening in Syria emerges. So many of these are Islamist groups that were supported by Saudi Arabia, by Turkey, by the UAE. The Russians have continued to support the government, even when Bashar al-Assad used chemical weapons against his people and looked like the rest of the world was ready to take action. Russia came in and said, well, we'll take over the chemical weapons and store them and destroy them. This is one maybe exception to the division that we see at the global and regional level, where the UN Security Council voted 15-0 to accept that compromise. But Assad regime got away with it, basically. We're supposed to have peace in Syria. They've been negotiating peace agreement, and they said, well, we need to have a managed transition away from Assad. This is 2017. And we'll have an election, and we will have a new constitution. This managed transition was not managed very well, never materialized. So the Russians obviously don't want to lose their ally. And we did not want to fight a hot war in Syria. We're willing to have a base and have maybe some bombing campaigns, but not boots on the ground. So this is what's strange about what happened in Syria. Look at what our allies are doing. Our allies are Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar, Turkey. Oh, they support the Islamist groups. This sounds just like what happened in Afghanistan. And look at what our enemies are doing. Our enemies, Russia, Iran, Hezbollah, and Shia militia from Iraq, are fighting the rebels. So whose side are we on? It's hard to, I guess, make a lot of sense of this. The Russians have helped Assad remain in power. They used their military bases, air campaigns to weaken the rebels. They bombed and leveled entire towns and cities. That's how you liberate a city. You basically kill everybody in it. Like it takes a village, there's no village. So they wanted to establish facts on the ground before they started peace negotiations. Like, we'll have the upper hands. probably similar to what's happening in Ukraine now. Before we have peace negotiations, we want to have the advantage. The opposition is highly fragmented, could not even agree on who to send for peace talks. So different countries are supporting different groups. And Turkey, our ally, actually threatened to go to war against us and our ally. Our allies in Syria are the Kurds, who've been arming and supporting the Kurds. And why is Turkey opposed to this? Because they don't want their Kurds to get the idea that they can gain independence too. They've been fighting the Kurds in Turkey for over 30 years. So this is the result. Aleppo, the famous market in Aleppo that's over 2,000 years old, was totally destroyed. Some of the most beautiful buildings and mosques in the world were destroyed. So this is similar to what we see in scenes in Gaza, before and after pictures. So we have this competition in the region between Russia and Iran on one hand and Turkey on the other hand. They have different goals and different agendas. Turkey's main goal is prevent Kurdish independence. Yes, they don't like al-Assad, they would like to see him go, but they would like their group to replace him. Iran wanted al-Assad to stay in power because that's their main ally in the region. Russia wanted Assad to stay in power. He's given them military bases, the only military bases they have in the region. This is war has been going on for a long time. Different presidents have come and gone, and we've had the same policies. Our objective is clear. We are going to degrade and ultimately destroy ISIS. Oh, by the way, Russia had the same goal. Iran had the same goal. Iraq has the same goal. The Syrian government had the same goal. So we have this unusual convergence of policies. Trump on Syria, basically he was doing the same thing. He talked about establishing safe zones, but that never happened. Trump's idea of fighting ISIS alongside the Russians is not new. We were doing that under Obama. So different presidents, but similar policies. So the Geneva Peace Conference, unfortunately, sounded good. Did any of that happen? This is 2017. Now we're 2025. That never happened. Again, the opposition was highly fragmented. The Russians and Iranians would not abandon the Assad regime. So how big was ISIS? Some say it maybe had 30,000, some say over 100,000. They include thousands of Westerners, including hundreds of Americans, including thousands of French, but include many Chechen fighters, vital for the operations of the Syrian forces say, Syrian, I guess, government sources say they had 50,000 ISIS fighters in Syria. So people were worried about the conflict becoming a hot war between different major powers in the region, even a global conflict with the United States on one side and Russia on the other side, Saudi Arabia on one side and Iran on the other side. Fortunately, that did not happen. But what did happen, surprisingly, is after 13 years of war, without much change in the government, it took 13 days for the Assad regime to collapse. 13 days by a group that most of us have not heard of. A group that was initially called ISIS, became al-Nusra, became HTS. After 13 years of war, it took 13 days. How did that happen? This is HTS, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. So this is the movement to liberate Syria. That's what the name means. How did they do this? But look who's leading it. The guy had a different name. If you go nom du jour, it's Abu Muhammad al-Julani, is the current president of Syria. Now he uses his real name, Ahmad al-Shara. Different. So he was the leader of al-Nusra Front, which is the name of ISIS in Syria. This guy was imprisoned by American forces in Iraq and then set free, and he went to Syria, where he led this group. This is him now, Ahmad al-Shara. He no longer goes by al-Julani. So he was known as Abu Muhammad al-Julani before. Again, an ISIS fighter and leader who's now the current president of Syria. So how did that happen in 13 days? What about Russia supporting and protecting the Assad regime? Oh, they're too busy fighting in Ukraine. They don't have enough munitions for Ukraine war. They don't have enough fighters, jet fighters, to fight in Ukraine, so they're busy, they can't support him. What about Iran? Iran has been weakened. They have lost one of their major clients in the region, Hezbollah. Israel has devastated the leadership of Hezbollah and killed thousands of their fighters. So there's no Hezbollah to come and fight on the ground for them. What about the Syrian army? The Syrian army were forcing people to join the military, and most of them did not want to join. This reminds us when the Mosul collapsed in Iraq without a single bullet being fired. The military just abandoned. This is not our fight. We don't really want to fight this war. We don't want to be in this army anyway. So many of these recruits were not motivated to fight, and certainly not fight for that government. And then this HTS has been preparing, arming, and equipping for years. And they got a lot of support from Turkey. So they moved from the north very quickly and took over the major cities, Aleppo and Damascus, in a matter of days. And of course, Assad fled, took a lot of cash and gold with him, and went to Russia, where he's in asylum in Russia. Israel took advantage of that and expanded the territory that occupies in Syria in the Golan Heights. They controlled some of the Golan Heights before. Now they control more of it, almost all of it. And Israel attacked all the military bases in Syria to destroy the air force, the radar installations, so Syria could not put up a fight in the future. So we have a new government led by a former leader of ISIS, who is now accepted and respected, who's been invited to talks in Russia and will soon be invited to talks in the White House. The Turks and the Saudis are negotiating a deal so he can come to the United States and be welcomed as, just like, remember, the Mujahideen came to the White House with President Reagan. They were welcomed in the White House. So that's nothing new. Of course, we still have some clashes going on between government forces, now Sunni-dominated, and the Shia, the Alawites, who supported the Assad regime along the coastal area. But one of the good news, and this is probably good news especially for Turkey, is that the Kurdish forces, very strong Kurdish forces, estimated at almost between 50 and 100,000 fighters, equipped, armed, trained by the United States, have agreed to join the Syrian military and be subject to government control. So they will no longer seek secession or independence. They will have their language protected, but they will be part of the Syrian government and the Syrian community. So there will be, again, a respected religious minority, ethnic minority, will have their own language protected, but they will be subject to Damascus control. So this is the new Syria as it is today. Could be different tomorrow, could be different next week, but there are some clear winners and losers. Who's the biggest winner? Turkey. Turkey got what it wanted. The group that it supported has taken over Syria, taken over the government. Bashar al-Assad is gone. Syria is no longer aligned with its rival, Iran, who had a different agenda than Turkey. So Turkey has the most influence and the most to gain. The Kurds are no longer a secessionist group, and even the Kurds in Turkey have agreed to renounce violence and become part of the Turkish government. So Turkey got what it wanted. Big win. They will have the most influence in Syria itself. They will probably get all the contracts for rebuilding and reconstruction of Syria. And the Kurdish problem might finally be solved. That's one of the big problems that Turkey had fought for decades. Israel, there is no Syrian military left. So Syria is no longer a threat to Israel. Israel controls the highlands in the Golan Heights, and Israel has demanded that all of southern Syria should be demilitarized. And they're trying to recruit the Druze to join Israel and the area where the Druze live to separate from Syria. They were trying to get the Kurds to separate, but the Kurds decided not to do that. So they're focused on the Druze. Russia, too early for Russia. They lost Assad, but they still have the military bases. They invited the new president of Syria to Russia, and they promised help, aid, food, cash. The new Syrian liras are actually being printed in Moscow. So billions of Syrian liras are being printed in Moscow and delivered to the Syrian government. They have not agreed to give Assad back to the Syrian government, because that would be betrayal, but they have agreed to work with the Syrian government on maybe forgiving some of Syria's debt, estimated to be over $20 billion, to Russia. And in exchange, they want to have a 50-year lease on these military bases. So they're working with the government. And Israel actually is supporting Russia's idea of retaining its bases. Why would Israel do this? They're more concerned about Turkey than they are about Russia, because they've been working with Russia throughout this war. The Russians have been operating in Syria, and the Israelis have been operating in Syria. They have been coordinating with each other. What about Iran? Probably the biggest loser, aside from the Assad regime. They lost Hezbollah. They lost Syria. And that Shia crescent is gone. They're worried that that might even lose influence in Iraq. because Iraq thinks if we stay so close to Iran, we will not get any help, any aid from our Arab brothers, the rich brothers we have in Saudi Arabia and the Gulf, or the United States. What about us? Too early to tell. We're happy to see the Assad regime gone, but just like in Afghanistan, be careful what you wish for. You might topple that government. Is the new government better? Way too early to tell. Like I said, there were actually negotiations to invite the new Syrian leader to the White House, and maybe we can make some deals with him. What about Syria? Is this good for Syria? It depends. Can Syria actually be united? Can Syria get the $400 billion that it needs for reconstruction? $400 billion. What about the Syrian refugees? Are they going to come back home? Some of them will. Some actually started to come back from Lebanon and from Turkey. Will they come from, the well-educated Syrians who fled, the rich Syrians? Will the new government honor its promise to be Syria for all Syrians, regardless of religion, of language, of ethnicity? That's a big question, really big question. So Syria is trying to make friends, negotiating with the Saudis, with the Qataris, with the Turks, with the Russians, with the Americans. How will that turn out? We'll just have to wait and see. So this is the big deal, where they have agreed to integrate the Kurdish forces in the Syrian military. So they'll be subject to government control and will no longer be independent, seeking either autonomy or total independence. So that was probably one of the biggest achievements that the new government has accomplished in the few weeks that it's been in power. This is one of the problems we talked about. Boundaries don't reflect. The Kurds are one group, what we call a nation without a state, people that don't have a country. The colonial powers forgot to give them a country. So we have about 20% of the Kurdish population, the Turkish population are Kurds. We have, again, a large Kurdish population in the northern of Iraq, in the west part of Iran, and the northern part of Syria. So they're scattered in 5 different countries, but they don't have their own country. They have hoped to achieve independence in this part of Turkey and eventually unite all the Kurds in 5 countries into one Kurdistan. So Kurdistan exists as a region, doesn't exist as a country. Will the Kurds be happy with that arrangement? For the time being, they say we're okay with that. We have renounced violence in Turkey and we will be integrated into Turkish society. We have renounced violence and independence in Syria and will be part of Syria, the new Syria. But will that really happen? Many were worried that the Middle East would be fragmented yet again. Syria would be divided into the Alawite region, the Kurdish region, and the Sunni region. Iraq would be divided into the Kurdish region, the Sunni region, and the Shia region. So these countries have a lot to deal with. The fact that they have these artificial boundaries is one of the biggest challenges they face. They have groups that did not choose to be together or put together by these colonial powers. So Shia majority Iraq was dominated by a Sunni minority. Sunni majority Syria was dominated by a Shia minority. Lebanon is dominated by a Christian minority. So country after country, we have similar problems. So what will the future hold? Hold your breath. We'll find out soon, hopefully. Questions, discussion? Got the first question right here.
Excuse me, about Kurdistan, people without a state. It wasn't anything new, but Condoleezza Rice brought up the idea of a great Middle Eastern project, which was carving out territory out of Turkey, Iran, Syria, Iraq, to establish a brand new country called Kurdistan, just like they did with Israel. And she specified 22 borders will have to be redrawn. And that was when the first Iraqi war started with WDM, MDs that didn't exist, etc. And it went on from there. This is what I think is what's being executed. That whole plan of destabilizing countries that were established at the end of World War I, and then dividing and conquering them for the purpose of basically establishing a country of Kurdistan. Now, when Turkey, you did not mention this, but at the end of World War I, Turkey launched in 1919 an independence war to take back some of the territories that were taken as war spoils, so to speak, from the failed Ottoman Empire. While that war was taking place, almost eastern one-third of today's Turkey were Kurds, and they fought for independence of this new nation. And the idea of Kurdistan being independent is not an all-Kurdish thought. It became a separatist movement more in the 70s.
Yes.
And that movement, I think you referred to PKK,
Yes.
was led by Öcalan,
Yes.
who was caught eventually somewhere in Europe, I believe, and
Yes.
put in jail. He's been in jail for the last quarter century. Just recently, he was given the opportunity to call on the terrorist organization PKK to give up their arms, the arms that the U.S. has been supplying them with. He agreed to do that, but he's never asked for independence, not even when he was, the most he has asked for is a territorial control of the eastern part of Turkey, some kind of independent within, but almost
Autonomy.
like the U.S. states.
Autonomy, yeah, autonomy.
Autonomy of some sort, but he's never asked for an independent Kurdish nation. The other countries that we mentioned never had such a movement with a leader saying independence for Kurds, etc. Because Kurds are so diffused through the populations of countries they live in, they just have higher concentrations in certain areas. And many of them, at least in Turkey, were educated at government expense right after the republic was founded. So they're in high positions. They can rise to high positions. The second president of Turkey was of Kurdish background. That was İsmet İnönü after Atatürk. So these are...
Is there a question in there?
Yeah, no, it's not a question, but I think I'm trying to expand the perspective that this is something in the process of being executed, and the root of it is going back to Condoleezza Rice and perhaps even before.
So the question is that really a Kurdish idea for independence, or is it motivated by others who want to instigate the divide and rule policies to maintain these countries unstable? So the answer to that is yes. The Kurds have wanted independence only recently. Again, Turkey has been fighting this group, like I said, for about 30 years. 30,000 people were killed, 50 years, since the 1970s. And the leader of the Kurdish-Turkish movement, who's been in jail for 25 years, has come out and said, lay down your weapons, we no longer want violence. And we want to integrate, again, many Kurds actually are in the Turkish parliament today. All they want is their language protected, because for a long time, many Turks thought, oh, well, these are just mountain Turks, and they need to be civilized. So that's not what they wanted. They want to protect their language and their heritage and their culture and get some degree of autonomy. So forget about overall independence. But there are people around the world who wanted to use this. And Israel has supported the Iraqi Kurds for decades and wanted them to seek independence because they saw Iraq as a threat. And now Iraq is no longer a threat, so they don't have to worry about this. They saw Syria as a threat, and they wanted Syria divided. This way it would be less of a threat. So this is not just a Kurdish idea. But the Kurds are the largest nation in the world that does not have a state. And this goes back to this colonial era when they did not create a Kurdistan. The French actually thought about creating a country for the Alawites, a country for the Druze, a country for the Christians, but they did not think about creating a country for the Kurds. So again, this divide and rule policy is not new. This has been exercised by the British, by the French, and by us. Because if you divide, you can rule. Just get them to fight among each other, and then they'll need us. We will be the protectors. We'll be the good guys. Other questions? Thank you for your perspective, by the way. That's enlightening.
The lady in pink, most of my questions were answered.
Oh.
The only question I had, after the U.S. withdrew and basically kicked the Kurds in the teeth, did anything really exceptional happen after that? And by the way, whoever I yelled out, my wife cut me off. Never mind.
Okay.
Okay, on your last slide, okay, since the colonial powers before screwed it up, okay, who's going to negotiate the lines in the sand this time? Is it the UN or is it?
Well, that's the big question is, will the people of the region make it work, given that they have the boundaries that they've had? Basically, they have no choice. They are in this country together. Can they figure out a formula where they can coexist? They can share resources. They can all benefit. Because it could be a win-win or a lose-lose. If they fight one another, they all lose. If they collaborate and learn to share, they could all win. And that's what we're hoping would happen in Syria. Now, the Kurds have agreed to turn over the oil revenue from the oil that's in Kurdistan, in Syrian region in the Kurdish region of Syria. So again, this is sharing the resources. 25% of the wealth will stay in the region, and then the rest will be shared by the country. So again, this is a win-win. So can these people learn? You didn't really have a choice in this. We were forced into this situation. We're going to make the best out of it. Or if we agree to be manipulated by others, we will continue to fight one another for decades to come, and we'll all lose. So the hope is that they've learned their lessons because they've suffered for so long. And it seems like the Kurds in Turkey have agreed to autonomy, preservation of their culture and language, and will be fully integrated into Turkish society. That's what the Turks would want. They're keeping a close eye to make sure that that happens. And they were worried about arms being smuggled from Syria and Iraq to support the Kurds in Turkey. During the Assad regime, that happened. Now, this new government is supported by Turkey. And it's supported by Turkey for one reason. They don't want that to happen. So they're hoping that this would be a win for Syria and a win for the Kurds and a win for Turkey. So we'll see if that actually happens. You have a question? Okay, we got one over there.
Doctor, everybody knows autocratic, what that means, but in one of your earlier slides under the type of government, you had onocratic, A-N-O-C-R-A-T-S. I don't know that word. Could you please explain that?
Sure. This is a government that pretends to be democratic, but it's actually autocratic. Like in Egypt, they held elections, and they hold elections every few years. So they have the symbols of democracy, or the institutions of democracy, but actually no democracy.
Most of South America you had is
Yes.
autocratic.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
So that's what happens, is basically you have one-party rule. Is one-party rule a democracy? If you go to vote and you only have one choice, is that really a choice? So that's what we see in many of these countries.
I'm going to move right back to the Mediterranean. If Russia has bases on the Mediterranean, that's really not good for us. Can we buy them out? I mean, what about Saudi Arabia and the whole gang there? I mean, they want money.
We are good at making deals, aren't we? Let's make a deal.
No, well, maybe somebody else should take that,
If
the deal
the
making.
Russians are willing to offer 20 billion, maybe we can offer 30 billion, and the Syrians will take it. Again, they're in it for the money. And I think, again, it depends. The current government, I don't know what kind of policies they will have. But the Russians are desperate to keep their only two military bases on the Mediterranean Sea. One air, one naval base. Can we take over these? Or maybe get some other countries to take them over? Turkey, Saudi Arabia. Well, like again, it will take $400 billion for reconstruction of Syria. For Saudi Arabia, that's just a weekend revenue. So they could do that if they wanted to. Yeah. Spending trillions of dollars on building one city, might as well rebuild the country for a few $100 billion. Oh, we have a question here.
Well, speaking of the outpost that is on the Mediterranean that has been of Russian control, the pictures that you see now, it appears to be deserted. It appears that Russia has removed itself, and there's a lot of decay and a lot of non-functioning equipment. And I was just wondering, you know, Churchill advised before he died, do not let Russia have the Eastern Mediterranean.
Again, the Russians have abandoned, took out most of their equipment, their jet fighters. That's why they couldn't help the Assad regime anyway, because they needed them in Ukraine. But they still want to keep these bases, hoping that in the future they can use them. The Syrians are, again, trying to make a deal, and they are talking to everybody. They're talking to the Saudis, they're talking to the Turks, they're talking to us, they're talking to the Russians. If we offer them a better deal, I guarantee you they will give us the bases, or at least prevent the Russians from keeping them. We don't have to have these bases. We already have bases in 180 plus countries around the world. We don't need more. But we can deny the Russians these bases, the only bases they have on the Mediterranean Sea. Why do they want them? Because they don't have any other bases. And for them, again, they've always had this dream of having access to the warm waters. The only access they have is through the Black Sea, which Turkey controls, our NATO ally. So the Russians don't have access to the warm waters. And that base on the Mediterranean is vital for them to have access to the Mediterranean and the rest of the world. Because if Turkey blocks the Bosphorus Straits, the Russians can't go anywhere. Yeah. They don't have a choice. So it's vital for them, but I think the Syrian government would be willing to listen. And they desperately need money for reconstruction. And again, don't have to shell the money out ourselves. We can get our allies in the region, the Saudis, the Emiratis, the Kuwaitis, the Qataris, to come up with the money so they don't have to rely on the Russians.
Doctor, in light of al-Shaara's background as a violent Islamic extremist with his, first ISIS, Al-Qaeda and then ISIS, what hope is there that he will come through with his promises, or at least his initial comments, that it would be, you could practice the religion of your choice and be somewhat democratic?
Well, again, that's a good question. He's certainly not, if you want, as strict as the Taliban or the Mujahideen were. And he seems to have converted. So he's like an Islamist, but more in the Turkish model rather than the Afghani model. So the hope is maybe a tiger can change his stripes. And in this case, he could actually become somewhat more secular. Again, he have in his speeches said Syria is for all Syrians. Everybody would have equal rights, regardless of their religion, ethnicity, or language, whatever sect they belong to. So I think the way to convince him to maintain this is to withhold support if they don't. Syria is in desperate need of aid, and they rely on our allies for aid. Our allies means Turkey. Our allies mean Saudi Arabia, the Emirates. So these countries will have a big role in maybe shaping the new Syria without our direct intervention. So we'll have to wait and see. One more question, let's see. Please.
I just want to jump in, just follow up
Yeah.
with what you just said. Even as we speak, the news coming out of Syria is that there is a genocide going on against Alawites because al-Shaara sees them as the remnants of Assad, and he wants to exterminate them. If you've seen his pictures after he became the official leader, so to speak, he has a picture with a tie, but next to him, his wife is covered from head to toe.
I saw that, yeah.
They're basically going to be Taliban's version on Syrian soil.
Well, again, this is one of the worst violence in Syria since the Assad regime collapsed. So there has been some violence, and there's been actually some skirmishes between Syrian and Lebanese forces along the border as well. But compared to what has been happening in Syria, we're talking about hundreds of people killed, and that's tragic. But we're talking about hundreds of thousands that were killed. So the government is trying to establish control. Whether that will be the end of it, whether that will continue, that's a big question. So it's not in Syria's interest for the rest of the world to see this happen. So if he wants to have credibility, he will put an end to that and do it quickly. Because otherwise, nobody's going to believe in him or in the new Syria or invest in the new Syria. We have one more question? Yeah. No problem.
So he's saying freedom for everyone or equal rights.
Yes.
Does that include women? Because that tells you where he's going. And that was your point. Am I right?
Well, the point she was making is that his wife is wearing really, really traditional Muslim clothes. So he's talking about equal rights for all. He doesn't specifically mention women.
For all men.
Yeah. No, he didn't say men, for all Syrians. Yeah. So again, well, did not specify women. But that's one of the questions. Again, remember, when Afghanistan, this is one of the big issues, is we wanted women's rights protected. And as soon as we left, all that progress was destroyed, was lost. It's even worse today than it used to be. So I don't think Syria is going to get to that. At least I'm hoping that it won't. But we'll just have to wait and see. Because Syria is in desperate, like, look at Turkey. The Turkish First Lady dresses in Islamic clothes. But Turkey has nudist beaches. So Turkey has government-run prostitution houses. So you can have these contradictions. I'm not hoping that Syria will do the same. I'm just saying that you can have contradictions in many countries. And certainly, oh yeah, of course we do. But it's too early to tell what will happen in Syria. We're hoping that if this guy is going to actually transform himself, he needs support from the international community. And the price of that support is democracy. Now, he's going to be in power for at least 5 years. 5 years. That's a transition period. That's a very long transition period. So what happens in the next few months will tell us what the future of Syria would look like. Let's hope it's better than it was under Assad. That's all we can say. Well, thank you all for coming.